Welcome to Multiverseatile. My name is Jake Long, and today's video is about a premise for Act 2 of a rewritten Antman and the Wasp Quantumania movie. The first video will be linked at the end of this one. I do want to say that I heard there were a lot of scenes cut from the movie, which of course happens a lot, and it's unfortunate since this movie did have a lot of potential. Also, I do have a slight add-on for Act 1 of this reworked version of the movie, and that is that when Scott and Cassie first arrive in the quantum realm, Scott asks her if she has any of those PIM discs since she used one on the cop car earlier in the movie. She sheepishly admits to having a few of them, and he tells her not to lose them. Now let's get into Act 2. Gentoro was telling Scott and Cassie the story of Kang getting injured after he helped them defeat Baron Karza when Kang's soldiers attacked the freedom fighters. Gentoro shouts out orders to her soldiers. Scott finds a place for Cassie to hide and joins the fight while keeping an eye on Cassie. Cassie hides only for a moment before joining the fight herself. Scott notices that Cassie has a suit, and he explains the technique for jumping, growing, and hitting a target. The battle rages on, and MODOK reveals himself to be Darren Cross. As you can tell, this scene plays out much the same way as it did in the movie. However, at the end of the scene, Scott grows and headbutts MODOK. He then destroys Kang's ships. The freedom fighters all gather in the buildings. Scott gathers them up and carries them away. Some of the buildings are left behind, but Gentoro informs Scott that the buildings will scatter and they will all find each other later. MODOK wakes up and contacts Kang, letting him know that he is in pursuit of Scott Lang. He informs Kang that Hank Pym isn't with him. Kang tells MODOK to search for Hank instead. Meanwhile, Janet, Hope, and Hank go to the bar, restaurant, truck stop, Star Wars place where they meet up with Krylar. Krylar betrays them and they take his ship. They head out to search for Scott and Cassie. Janet picks up on the Kang story, saying that after Kang was injured, Quaz was able to read his mind. They discovered that Kang had a psychic inhibitor chip in his neck that had been damaged when Kang was injured. Quaz discovered that Kang had been traveling across the multiverse, destroying several timelines before some of his variants banished him to the quantum realm. Janet tells them that she destroyed his time machine before it could be finished. She had growing and shrinking PIM discs, which she used on the time engine machine, and that caused it to implode. Kang was able to get away, and Janet banished herself. She blamed herself for bringing Kang into the lives of the quantum people. We go back to Scott, Cassie, and the freedom fighters after they've found a good place to hide out and set up camp. Quaz continues to try and contact Janet telepathically. Gentoro tells Scott and Cassie that Kang eventually found favor with another group of people, and he eventually took over the remainder of Baron Karza's people. He also turned many of Gentoro's people against her, and that's why their band of freedom fighters are on the verge of extinction. There are many who conformed to living under Kang's rule. Gentoro and her people haven't even fought back in a while, and Kang has resorted to letting them live as long as they don't attack him. Gentoro explains that this isn't Scott's battle, and if Janet is right about Hank, they need to get out of the quantum realm as soon as possible. Cassie insists that they help, and Scott agrees. He says they will help, but if they can contact their home, they can get more help. In the meantime, he doesn't want Cassie to fight. She insists that she should know how to fight just in case. Scott, Cassie, and Gentoro train together, while Zolom and Veb provide an audience. Cassie starts to get a hang of the growing and shrinking fighting technique. They eat outside with the light of a dim plasma fire hidden under a shallow cave. Gentoro, Zolom, and Veb stay out with them. Quaz joins them and informs them that he has had no luck searching for Janet. Gentoro insists that he quit for tonight. There's not much room in the buildings for everyone, so Scott and Cassie volunteer to sleep under the shallow cave. The rest of the group stays out there as well. They settle in, and Scott says, "Now we are definitely camping." Cassie responds, "Alright, I guess we're camping." Zolom asks, "What is camping?" Scott tries to explain that camping is where you sleep outside for fun. Veb asks why it is fun to sleep outside, especially when there are so many dangerous creatures. Scott says, "Well, now I'm not so sure I want to be camping right now." Veb asks if it is necessary to have holes to enjoy camping, and Scott explains that you would be able to enjoy s'mores. They have a conversation about s'mores and use the freedom fighters' food in an attempt to replicate them. Afterwards, Zolom asks Scott to put the plasma fire out in case Kang's soldiers are out looking for them. Scott throws some dirt on it, and the fire grows just enough to startle Scott. Zolom and Gentoro laugh. Gentoro explains that there is an element in the dirt that makes the plasma fire stronger. Zolom grabs a blanket and covers the plasma fire with it, smothering it. Jintora tells him that the blanket is made up of a specialized material that contains the energy and that a similar thing happened to Janet. That's why they pulled the prank on him. Cassie says that the quantum realm is so strange, but in a good way. Jintora asks her what she means, and Cassie points to and mentions a specific formation in the night sky. Jintora explains that a lot of those different formations are time vortexes, and many of the formations are made up of different sorts of elements, so they don't look similar like the stars that are seen from Scott and Cassie's outside world. At least that's what her and Janet figured out. Cassie asks her if she would ever want to go to the outside world, and Jintora replies that she would one day want to after peace has been established in the quantum realm. Cassie says that she will show her all of the best places if they ever get out and if they ever find Janet, Hope, and Hank. Scott assures Cassie that they will find the rest of the Ant family and that they are going to be okay, and Cassie assures Scott the same. She emphasizes Hope by saying Hope is going to be okay, she's strong, she's a good partner. Scott replies, "You're right. Thanks, Peanut. And I'm lucky to have another good partner with me right now," or something along those lines. Janet, Hank, and Hope fly around the ship, going to every location that Janet knows about. They assure her that it wasn't her fault that Kang turned out to be a bad guy. She replies that she felt ashamed to stay there whether it was her fault or not. Fortunately, she was able to communicate with Scott much later, and that's when they rescued her. They're all tired, so they decide to find a hidden spot to land the ship and rest for the night. Hank, Hope, and Janet reassure each other that Scott and Cassie will be okay. MODOK finds Hope, Hank, and Janet's ship and informs Kang's soldiers. MODOK attacks them. They take off in the ship to try and get away. MODOK pursues them and Kang's ships follow close behind. Quaz is meditating and searching for Janet when he telepathically hears that Janet, Hank, and Hope are under attack. Quaz yells out loud and the others wake up asking him what's happening. Scott grows and takes Quaz, Jintora, and Cassie with him to find the rest of the Ant family. MODOK and Kang's ships are advancing on Hope, Hank, and Janet, but Giant Scott comes around the corner of a mountain and punches one of Kang's ships out of the air. However, MODOK and Kang's soldiers knock Scott down and he shrinks back to normal. Hank goes over to check on him. Kang's soldiers manage to knock Hope down long enough to get Hank, and MODOK takes off with him. The other freedom fighters show up to the fight. Wasp destroys the engines for the other ships. Wasp, Janet, and Scott and the freedom fighters fly away following MODOK. Jintora tells them that they need to stop before they get too close to the city, and Kang sends more ships after them. MODOK glides into Kang's city. As MODOK presents Hank to Kang, he takes off his cloak and sees that it is actually Scott. Kang is of course very displeased. Kang and MODOK take Scott's Antman suit and helmet. They take him to his jail cell, and Kang tells MODOK to go and send a message out stating that unless Hank turns himself in before nightfall, Scott will die, and Kang's forces will hunt down the remaining freedom fighters. MODOK leaves to send the message. Scott and Kang have their conversation similar to the one that happened in the movie, with a few exceptions, and Cassie isn't there this time. The whole thing about Scott getting confused for Thor was good, even though we'll say that in this version, Kang was definitely messing with him. Kang explains that he has fought and killed Hank as Ant-Man, but not Scott Lang. Scott points out that Kang pretended to be Janet's friend in the quantum realm while knowing that he had killed a version of her husband before. Kang tells Scott that he can't possibly begin to comprehend the importance of his work, and that's why he needs Hank's help in order to continue. Kang reveals that he knows that Tony Stark invented time travel. To him, the use of Pym particles for time travel is an archaic method that he is not exactly sure how to replicate. He's been stuck in the quantum realm working on it for 10 years, but it has taken a lot of work to try and develop the right compounds and components. He explains that experimentation in the quantum realm is still new territory for him, and it is very dangerous. He tells Scott that he will send him through time first to test out the technology. He tells him that he will send him to 2018 so that he can make up for lost time with Cassie, and he will leave him there if he wants. Scott tells him that he wouldn't choose that, and there would still be a Cassie here without him. Kang tells him that he might see things differently when the opportunity is in front of him. The freedom fighters hide out a ways away from Kang's city. Hope walks over to check on Scott only to see that Hank is there instead. Quaz nearly passes out as he informs everyone that he was able to telepathically make MODOK think that he had taken Hank, but he took Scott instead. They pick up the message from MODOK, and Hank tells them that they need to go there and get Scott out. Hope insists that they need to take some more time to come up with a plan. Jintora informs them that they will be meeting up with their buildings and the rest of the freedom fighters soon. Hank says he might also be able to help Quaz amplify his powers and contact someone else the same way that he contacted the Ant family before. Hope asks Jintora if she can have someone show Hank and Janet their communications technology, while she tells the rest of them about King City and how they might be able to attack it. Back at Scott's jail cell, MODOK comes floating in to check on Scott. MODOK tells him the story of what happened to him after Scott shrunk him down into the quantum realm. Scott tries to convince MODOK to help him, but MODOK refuses, telling him that King has promised him a new body once they escape the quantum realm. Back at the Freedom Fighters base, Hank tells the others that they won't be able to contact the outside world without Kang's communication system. Hank asks what the plan is, and Hope tells him that they're going to think like Scott for this one. She says that they're going to break in, get Scott, send a signal to the outside world, steal Kang's time engine and Pym particles, and get out. Hank replies, "That sounds great, but how are we going to do that?" Hope replies, "That's where you and Cassie come in," she says as she looks to Cassie, who smiles and holds out her hand, displaying some Pym discs. We cut to Krylar's ship flying, and as the camera moves out, we see that the ship is shrunken down. Hank flies the ship into the city undetected. Hank manages to break Scott out of his jail cell, and they nearly reach an old communications room when they get caught by MODOK. MODOK brings them to Kang. Scott is not too excited about being the time travel guinea pig again, but he jokes that at least he might get some more time travel material to put in his next book. Kang wastes no time and puts both Hank and Scott to work. At the Freedom Fighters base, Janet waits to hear from Hank. And that is Act 2 of Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania Rewritten. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and take care.